Hi, I'm Elena, and I'm about to tell you how a wealthy family forced me to wash dirty dishes in their kitchen during their lavish wedding, treating me like hired help because of my worn-out clothes. They had no idea that my brother owned a tech empire worth billions and was about to buy their precious venue right out from under them. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. You know, there's something powerful about discovering your own strength in the darkest moments. Sometimes life puts us in situations that feel impossible, where everything seems stacked against us and we wonder if we'll ever find our way out. But those moments, those painful experiences that test every fiber of our being, they're not just obstacles. They're opportunities to discover who we really are underneath all the expectations and assumptions others place on us. They're chances to prove that our worth isn't determined by what we wear, where we live, or how much money we have in our bank account. Our value comes from something much deeper, something that can't be bought or sold or judged by superficial standards. Let me take you back to 6 months ago, when I learned this lesson in the most unexpected and painful way possible. I was living in a small apartment on the outskirts of Riverside Falls, working 2 part-time jobs just to make ends meet. Life had been challenging since I'd graduated college 3 years earlier, with a degree in education but struggled to find a full-time teaching position. The economy was tough, schools were cutting budgets, and competition was fierce. So there I was, waiting tables at a local diner during the day and cleaning office buildings at night, holding on to hope that something better would come along. My brother Daniel had always been the success story in our family. While I was struggling with student loans and minimum wage jobs, he'd built a technology company from nothing into a multi-billion-dollar empire. We'd grown up in the same modest household, shared the same dreams and challenges, but somehow he'd found his path to extraordinary success while I was still searching for mine. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't jealous or bitter about his achievements. Daniel had worked incredibly hard for everything he'd accomplished, often sleeping in his office during the early days of his company, sacrificing social life and comfort to build something meaningful. He deserved every bit of his success. What made our relationship special was that Daniel's wealth and status never changed how he treated me or anyone else. He remained humble, kind, and generous, always offering to help me financially, though I usually declined. I wanted to make my own way in the world, to prove to myself that I could succeed on my own terms. It was probably stubborn pride, but it felt important to maintain my independence, even when independence meant eating ramen noodles for dinner more nights than I cared to admit. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped under my apartment door while I was getting ready for my shift at the diner. It was elegant, printed on thick cream-colored paper with gold embossing that caught the morning light streaming through my small kitchen window. The envelope was addressed to Elena Rodriguez in beautiful calligraphy, and for a moment, I wondered if there had been some mistake. I rarely received formal invitations to anything, let alone something that looked this expensive and sophisticated. Inside, I discovered it was a wedding invitation from someone named Victoria Ashworth, who was marrying a man called Preston Blackwell. The wedding was to be held at the prestigious Grandview Manor, one of the most exclusive venues in the state. I stared at the invitation for several minutes, trying to place the names, when suddenly it clicked. Victoria Ashworth was my college roommate from freshman year, someone I'd lost touch with after she transferred to a more expensive private university. We'd been close during that brief time, staying up late talking about our dreams and futures, sharing meals and study sessions, supporting each other through the challenges of being away from home for the first time. Victoria had come from wealth, though she'd never made me feel inferior because of my more modest background. Her family owned several successful businesses, and she'd always been generous, often insisting on paying when we went out for coffee or movies. When she transferred schools, we'd promised to stay in touch, but life had a way of pulling people in different directions. Social media connections and occasional messages had gradually faded into nothing, so receiving this invitation felt like an unexpected gift. A chance to reconnect with someone who'd been genuinely important to me during a formative time in my life. The invitation included a handwritten note on matching stationery that made my heart warm with genuine affection. Elena, I know it's been years, but I've never forgotten our friendship and how much your support meant to me during that crazy freshman year. I would be absolutely honored if you could be there to celebrate this special day with me. I've missed you more than you know, and I can't wait to catch up and hear about everything you've been doing. Please say you'll come. With love, Victoria. Reading those words brought back a flood of memories from our college days. Victoria laughing until she cried at my terrible jokes, staying up all night helping me study for chemistry exams, sharing care packages from her family, and always being the kind of friend who listened without judgment. She'd been one of those rare people who made you feel valued and appreciated exactly as you were, never trying to change you or make you feel like you weren't enough. The fact that she'd thought to include me in her wedding, despite the years and distance between us, spoke volumes about the kind of person she was. I immediately knew I wanted to attend, even though the venue was several hours away and would require taking time off from both my jobs. The thought of seeing Victoria again, of celebrating her happiness and maybe rekindling an old friendship, felt worth the sacrifice. I called in favors with my supervisors, arranged to trade shifts with coworkers, and started planning for what I hoped would be a wonderful reunion. The challenge, of course, was figuring out what to wear. My wardrobe consisted mainly of work uniforms, casual clothes, and a few pieces suitable for job interviews. I owned exactly one dress that could be considered appropriate for a wedding, a simple navy blue shift dress I'd bought for a cousin's ceremony 2 years earlier. It was clean, well-fitted, and modest, though certainly nothing that would be considered fashionable or expensive. The fabric was a basic polyester blend, and while it looked perfectly respectable, it clearly came from a department store rather than a boutique. Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I paired the dress with my only good shoes, black flats that were comfortable but showed signs of wear, and borrowed a small pearl necklace from my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who'd always been kind to me. Looking in my bathroom mirror, I felt presentable and appropriate for the occasion. The dress was classic and timeless, and while it wasn't designer or particularly stylish, it was clean, modest, and respectful. I reminded myself that Victoria had always cared more about character than appearance, and surely her family and friends would be welcoming and kind. The drive to Grandview Manor took 3.5 hours, winding through scenic countryside and increasingly affluent neighborhoods. As I got closer to the venue, the houses became larger and more impressive, with manicured lawns and expensive cars in every driveway. I began to feel a flutter of nervousness in my stomach, wondering if I'd be out of place at such an obviously upscale event. My old Honda Civic, with its faded paint and visible rust spots, seemed increasingly shabby compared to the luxury vehicles I was seeing on the road. Grandview Manor was even more impressive than I'd imagined. The building was a stunning example of classical architecture, with soaring white columns, perfectly maintained gardens, and a circular driveway that could have accommodated dozens of cars. Valets in crisp white shirts and black vests were efficiently handling a steady stream of luxury vehicles, and I watched nervously as guests in elegant attire made their way toward the entrance. Everyone looked like they'd stepped out of a fashion magazine, the women in designer dresses and expensive jewelry, the men in perfectly tailored suits that probably cost more than I made in several months. As I approached the valet station, I felt increasingly self-conscious about my modest appearance and aging car. The young man who took my keys was professional and polite, but I caught him glancing at my vehicle with what might have been surprise or confusion. I wondered if he was used to parking much more expensive cars and whether my Honda looked as out of place as I was beginning to feel. Walking toward the entrance, I took deep breaths and reminded myself why I was there. This was about celebrating Victoria's happiness and reconnecting with an old friend. The external trappings didn't matter. What mattered was being present for someone who'd invited me to share in one of the most important days of her life. I straightened my shoulders, lifted my chin, and walked through the ornate front doors with as much confidence as I could muster. The interior of Grandview Manor was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over marble floors and elaborate floral arrangements. Everything spoke of luxury and refinement, from the silk wallpaper to the antique furniture positioned throughout the reception areas. Guests mingled with champagne glasses, their conversations creating a sophisticated buzz that filled the elegant spaces. I felt like I'd stepped into a different world, one where everything was beautiful and expensive and far removed from my everyday reality. At the reception desk, a woman with perfectly styled hair and an outfit that probably cost more than my monthly rent was checking guests against a list. When I approached and gave my name, she looked me up and down with an expression that wasn't quite hostile, but certainly wasn't warm. She found my name on the list and handed me a small card with a table number, but her demeanor suggested she was puzzled by my presence at such an exclusive event. Following signs toward the reception area, I walked through hallways lined with professional photographs of Victoria and Preston. They looked radiant together, clearly deeply in love, and seeing their happiness made me smile despite my growing nervousness about fitting in. The reception hall was magnificent, with round tables covered in pristine white linens and elaborate centerpieces that must have cost a fortune. Everything was perfect, elegant, and obviously expensive. I looked down at my table assignment card, Table 18. Following the numbers, I walked through the room, passing tables positioned closer to the head table where the wedding party would sit. The further I walked, the more isolated the tables became, until I reached the very back of the room, near what appeared to be service doors leading to the kitchen area. Table 18 was smaller than the others, positioned in a corner where the view of the ceremony area was partially blocked by decorative columns. But what really confused me was that the other people at the table weren't wedding guests at all. They were clearly venue staff members, servers, and kitchen workers who were taking a brief break between their duties. They looked as surprised to see me there as I was to find myself among them, and when I showed them my table card, they seemed genuinely puzzled about why a wedding guest would be seated with the working staff. Before I could fully process the situation, a woman approached our table with the kind of confidence that suggested she was used to being in charge. She was impeccably dressed in a silver cocktail dress that shimmered under the chandeliers, her blonde hair styled in an elaborate updo that must have taken hours to perfect. Her jewelry caught the light with every movement, and everything about her appearance screamed wealth and status. She looked to be in her early 50s, with the kind of polished elegance that comes from a lifetime of luxury and privilege. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate compliance. "I'm Penelope Ashworth, Victoria's mother, and I believe there's been some confusion here." Her eyes swept over me with the kind of assessment that made me feel like I was being catalogued and found wanting. "You appear to be sitting with our service staff, but you're clearly not in uniform. Are you perhaps new to the catering team?" I stood up quickly, feeling heat rush to my cheeks. "Oh no, Mrs. Ashworth, I'm Elena Rodriguez. I'm actually a guest at the wedding. Victoria and I were college roommates, and she invited me to celebrate with her today. I think there might have been a mistake with the seating arrangements." Penelope's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose in what appeared to be genuine surprise, though not the pleasant kind. "College roommate?" she repeated, as if the words didn't quite make sense to her. I was under the impression that Victoria attended Westfield Academy, one of the most prestigious private universities in the country. "Are you certain you have the right person?" "We were roommates during freshman year, before she transferred," I explained, trying to keep my voice steady despite the growing uncomfortable feeling in my stomach. We stayed in touch for a while after that, and when I received the invitation, I was so excited to reconnect and celebrate this special day with her. Penelope's expression shifted from surprise to something that looked distinctly like skepticism, mixed with disdain. "I see," she said slowly, her tone suggesting she didn't see at all. "And what is it that you do for work, Elena? Where are you employed currently?" The question felt loaded, like a test I was destined to fail. "I work at Riverside Diner during the day, and I do cleaning services for office buildings in the evenings. I'm also looking for teaching positions, since I have my education degree." The silence that followed my answer was deafening. Penelope's expression went through several changes, from confusion to what looked like horror, and finally settling into a kind of cold calculation that made my skin crawl. One of the staff members at my table, a kind-looking woman in her 40s wearing a server's uniform, shot me a sympathetic look that suggested she'd witnessed this kind of interaction before. "I think I understand the confusion now," Penelope said finally, her voice taking on the patronizing tone people use when they think they're being clever. "You see, dear, this is a very exclusive event. The guest list was carefully curated to include only family and close friends who move in certain social circles. I'm sure Victoria meant well when she sent you that invitation, but sometimes young people don't fully understand the complexities of proper social arrangements." I felt like I'd been slapped. "I'm sorry, but I don't understand what you're implying." Victoria specifically wrote a personal note saying how much she wanted me to be here. We were genuine friends in college, and she said she'd missed me and wanted to catch up. "Oh, I'm sure she was being kind," Penelope continued, her smile as cold as winter ice. "Victoria has always had a soft heart for charity cases. But you have to understand, dear, that there are certain expectations at events like this. The other guests are business associates, socialites, people of a certain standing in the community. They come from families with established wealth and influence. Mixing different social classes can create uncomfortable situations for everyone involved. The woman's words hit me like physical blows. I'd encountered classism before, but never delivered with such casual cruelty, wrapped in false kindness that made it even more painful. Mrs. Ashworth, I understand this is an elegant event, but I'm here as Victoria's invited guest. I may not have designer clothes or expensive jewelry, but I care about your daughter and wanted to celebrate her happiness. Of course you do, dear, Penelope said with the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. And I'm sure Victoria appreciates the sentiment, but you have to see how your presence here might be awkward. The other guests might feel uncomfortable trying to make conversation with someone who doesn't share their experiences or interests. It's not about being unkind. It's about everyone feeling at ease and enjoying themselves. Before I could respond, another woman joined our conversation. This one was younger, probably in her late 20s, with the same blonde hair and sharp features as Penelope. She was wearing a stunning burgundy dress that probably cost more than I made in 6 months, and her jewelry was so elaborate it caught the light from every angle. Everything about her screamed money and privilege, from her perfectly manicured nails to her designer shoes that looked like they'd never touched a sidewalk. Mother, what's going on here? The younger woman asked, looking between Penelope and me with obvious confusion. I saw you talking and wondered if there was some kind of problem. This is Elena, Penelope said, as if my name explained everything. She claims to be a friend of Victoria's from college, but there seems to be some confusion about appropriate seating arrangements. Elena, this is my older daughter, Adriana. Adriana looked me up and down with the same assessing gaze as her mother, and I watched her expression change as she took in my simple dress, worn shoes, and obvious lack of expensive accessories. Oh, she said, and that single word contained volumes of judgment and dismissal. I see what's happening here. Adriana, dear, I was just explaining to Elena that perhaps she'd be more comfortable in a different setting. This kind of formal event can be overwhelming for people who aren't used to high society gatherings. Absolutely, Adriana agreed, nodding as if this was the most reasonable suggestion in the world. You know, Elena, the kitchen staff here is absolutely lovely. They're hardworking, honest people who really understand the value of $1. I think you'd find much more in common with them than with our other guests. Plus, they could probably use some extra help today. Weddings this size require enormous amounts of work. I stared at both women, trying to process what I was hearing. Are you suggesting that I should work at Victoria's wedding instead of attending as a guest? Well, when you put it that way, it sounds harsh, Penelope said with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. But think about it practically. You're clearly someone who's used to working hard for what you have. The kitchen staff is overwhelmed with dishes and food preparation. You could be genuinely helpful while still being part of the celebration, just in a more appropriate capacity. This is ridiculous, I said, my voice rising slightly despite my efforts to stay calm. I was personally invited by Victoria. I drove 3.5 hours to be here. I'm her friend, not an employee. Adriana exchanged a look with her mother that suggested they'd had conversations like this before. Look, Elena, let's be realistic here. You're wearing a dress that clearly came from a discount store. Your shoes are worn out, and your jewelry looks like it came from a costume shop. Do you really think you blend in with the other guests? Don't you think Victoria would be embarrassed having to explain who you are and why you're here? The cruelty of her words took my breath away. I'd faced financial struggles, job rejections, and personal setbacks, but I'd never encountered such deliberate, calculated meanness disguised as helpful advice. These women were attacking everything about me, from my appearance to my worth as a human being, and they were doing it with smiles on their faces. Furthermore, Penelope continued, warming to her theme, I think you'll find that the kitchen staff appreciates hard work and understands what it means to earn an honest living. They won't judge you for your background or make you feel out of place. Isn't that better than sitting here feeling awkward and excluded all evening? One of the servers at my table, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, looked like he wanted to say something but clearly felt it wasn't his place to intervene. The other staff members were watching the interaction with expressions ranging from sympathy to outright anger on my behalf. It was clear they recognized the injustice of what was happening, but they also understood their precarious position as employees who couldn't afford to challenge wealthy clients. I think there's been a misunderstanding, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. I'm not here to work. I'm here because Victoria invited me as her friend. If there's a problem with my seating, perhaps I should speak with her directly. Oh dear, you can't possibly bother the bride on her wedding day with seating concerns, Adriana said with mock horror. She's busy with photographs and family obligations. Besides, she's probably forgotten that she even sent you an invitation. You know how these things are planned months in advance and guest lists change constantly. That's not true, I protested. She wrote a personal note saying how much she wanted me here and how she'd missed our friendship. Penelope waved her hand dismissively. Young people write all sorts of sentimental things without thinking through the practical implications. I'm sure Victoria meant well, but she probably didn't consider how awkward it would be for everyone involved. Sometimes the kindest thing is to quietly remove yourself from situations where you don't belong. The conversation was attracting attention from nearby tables. Other guests were beginning to notice the commotion, and I could see people whispering and pointing in our direction. Some looked curious, others seemed amused, and a few appeared uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. The attention made everything worse, turning my humiliation into a public spectacle that I desperately wanted to escape. Look, Adriana said, lowering her voice slightly. The kitchen manager mentioned they're short-staffed today. They're behind on dishes, and the dinner service is going to be challenging. You could genuinely help out while still being part of the celebration. Think of it as contributing to Victoria's special day in a meaningful way. You want me to wash dishes at my friend's wedding, I said flatly, still trying to process the surreal nature of what was being suggested. It's honest work, Penelope said with false brightness. And you'd be helping ensure that everything runs smoothly for Victoria's big day. Isn't that what friendship is really about? Supporting each other in practical ways? I looked around the table at the staff members, who were clearly uncomfortable being witness to this conversation. The server who'd shown me sympathy earlier leaned slightly toward me and said quietly, "You don't have to do anything you don't want to do, honey. This isn't right." Her words gave me a moment of clarity in the midst of the confusion and humiliation. These women were trying to manipulate me into accepting their version of my worth, into agreeing that I belonged in the kitchen rather than at the celebration. They were using my love for Victoria and my desire to contribute to her happiness as weapons against my dignity and self-respect. I appreciate the suggestion, I said, standing up straighter and looking directly at both Penelope and Adriana. But I'm here as Victoria's invited guest, and that's how I intend to remain. If there's truly a problem with my seating, I'll discuss it with Victoria herself when she has a moment. The temperature in the conversation dropped several degrees. Penelope's fake smile became even more strained, and Adriana's expression shifted to something approaching hostility. I think you're being very unrealistic about your situation here, Penelope said, her voice losing its false warmth. Perhaps you don't understand the kind of event this is, or the expectations that come with attending. What I understand, I replied, finding strength I didn't know I possessed, is that I was invited by the bride. I came here in good faith to celebrate her happiness, and I deserve to be treated with basic respect regardless of what I'm wearing or what I do for work. The silence that followed was thick with tension. Other guests were now openly staring, and I could see a few people pulling out their phones, probably to record what was clearly becoming a dramatic confrontation. The staff members at my table looked like they wanted to applaud, while Penelope and Adriana appeared to be calculating their next move. Well, Adriana said finally, I suppose we'll see how the evening progresses. But don't say we didn't try to help you find a more appropriate place where you'd actually be appreciated. As they walked away, their expensive heels clicking on the marble floor, I sank back into my chair feeling like I'd been through an emotional hurricane. The staff members at my table immediately rallied around me, offering words of support and encouragement. Their kindness was a stark contrast to the cruelty I'd just experienced, and it reminded me that character and decency had nothing to do with social status or bank account balances. But even as I tried to regain my composure, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of what was going to be a very long and difficult evening. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.